Good morning, afternoon, or evening, whichever time you're watching this. You're watching UL live, and well, at least we're all think we're live here today. I am Al Ernst, and I am one of your co-hosts with Pastor Jeff Gross, or PJG, as we now like to call him, at New Life Lutheran Church in Sarasota, Florida. After a little week's vacation, some folks out on vacation, and you were at Synod Assembly,
Yep.
the Florida Synod. So we took a week off, and hopefully we are now back for the summer. So why don't we open up with a prayer?
Sure. Great God, we thank you for any and every opportunity to learn, to grow in our faith, to become more informed, and to allow our informed nature and our intelligence to nuance the way we believe. And we're grateful for that. And we're grateful for our summers, and we're grateful for our opportunities for relaxing and Sabbath. And we ask your blessings on those who watch, including Al and Brian and all who are a part of this ministry. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Well, as we had spoken on our last session, we were just entering or coming out of Pentecost and into this period of what you say is the longest space before another, which I guess is what the coming into the October Reformation period.
There's a real interesting little phenomena there in Anglican and Catholic churches, and I'm not sure about other denominations, that they refer to this period of time as ordinary time. They also have a period of ordinary time between Christmas and Easter too, during the season of, we call the season of Epiphany. They would refer to that as ordinary time. So ordinary time, I guess we Lutherans just decided, let's just call it the Sundays after Pentecost, and that's what we call it. And so we celebrate Pentecost for a very long time, and we wear the color green. I guess it's
we're closer today.
I'm closer to green than I am to any color other than blue, perhaps.
Right.
But yeah, it's a long period of time, a long stretch. And although I don't like the words ordinary, I think the word ordinary is an ordinary word. I like the word extraordinary. And I like to think any time with the Lord is extraordinary, Al. So I call it extraordinary time.
There you go. Well, what we did call it a couple of weeks ago, which we want to kind of concentrate on our summer series, is we said this was a time of action. A lot of the descriptions of the actual actions of the apostles and of all the church and everything like that, people were in action. It wasn't summer as we think about it, which in our agrarian society here, we still, I guess some schools don't really honor that anymore, but most school systems still honor that as the time where you would take that summer break, where the kids would then go to the farms and help out and work, and that just became a tradition of the school year.
It's kind of funny you mentioned that, because I was a town kid, and there were a lot of farm kids, and so we called it summer vacation. They called it anything but vacation.
Right.
It was summer vocation for those guys, because they were baling hay, they were picking rocks, they were picking weeds, they were loading silos, milking cows. They were busy. They would far prefer to have been in school in some cases. But you're right. It's funny. We have these out in the burbs. We don't have a whole lot of farms, but we still have our quote unquote summer vacation.
Yeah, it's just kind of the way the calendar now. They had been talking about it since I was in school about changing that, and then having quarters and then large weeks of breaks in between the quarters, and basically going to year-round school. But I think just like of course, like they said, the metric system was supposed to be the system of measurement converted in the United States. I want to say when I was in junior high, they said it would be done by 1980, and now we're in 2023, and we are still not on the metric system.
Nope. We most definitely aren't.
So I think some things have a tendency to stay in tradition, and I think one of those is the school years. Although a lot of schools now, I guess the South and the North are very different in that I know a lot of the northern school systems go well into the month of June and then don't pick up until after Labor Day, whereas we end sometimes before Memorial Day in the South, and they are well 2 to 3 weeks into the school year by the time the Labor Day holiday comes along, and that's the only real kind of discrepancy as far as schools go that I can think of. So, with that being said, as we said, we were going to talk about action, and one of the things we really wanted to talk about was to get to know. Jeff and I have been doing this for now going on. I cannot believe we're going on 3 years of doing these shows, and one of the things we've never really talked about is the actual vocation of a pastor. Of what we talk about action. The pastor is for lack of a better term, the CEO of the local congregation and the church, and got a lot of duties that we don't see that go way beyond that Sunday morning worship series that everybody thinks about as being the pastor's primary functioning. And I wanted to talk about some of the other things as we go on through weeks. And I guess my thought process says, what are other functions that a pastor does? And I wanted to go kind of start out with something a little bit easier, but also ask you some questions about how you make decisions on this particular subject, because I see it different in so many denominations and in so many different religious is weddings.
Right.
Weddings are my term in entertainment is a gig. It's another service. It's a gig that you do. You are legally able to perform weddings. Now, can you do that in any of the 50 states in the United States, or is that
more or less? Some states are a little bit more restrictive as to who can do it and who can't. Some states require you register before you perform a wedding or be on their registry. I'm registered in the state of Minnesota, but I did my brother-in-law's wedding in Texas, and I called up and I said, I need to swing by your courthouse when I'm in town to register. And they said, are you ordained? I said, yep. And they said, okay, you don't have to. I'm like, oh, okay. Guess what? You could be ordained for all they know.
Well,
so I think so. It all depends, and where it gets a little bit more restrictive is if you're certified to do marriage counseling. That's where you're required to be certified and registered and all those kind of things in courthouses and stuff like that. But yeah, performing weddings is I can do it pretty much anywhere. In the United States, it get a little tricky to do it in like the Bahamas or something like that.
Well, the reason I ask you that is because, believe it or not, you're also talking to a person who had performed a legal wedding. I was what in the state of Massachusetts is called an officiant, and I actually married some fellow friends that were worked with me on a cruise ship, and they got married in Massachusetts, and I had to get what was a 1-day officiant's license to be able to perform the wedding.
Oh, okay. That's how Massachusetts runs.
Right.
Okay.
Well,
I haven't done one up there, so that's good to know.
Well, I still have my certified letter signed by the governor of Massachusetts at the time, Mitt Romney.
Wow.
But the joke I had as a comedian doing that was that I was going to open up a shingle for that one day and say, you got 24 hours to be married by a comedian. So have at it. How many people can I get through? And what it turns out is that when you do the application, we went through the process of doing the application. You are only certified to legally marry one couple that is named on the application. I mean, you're not, you just don't get free reign for 24 hours, but you are able to do that. And they designed a service, and I performed the service, and I married them, and of which I am proud to say that they have now been married probably over 20 years and 3 kids, and they're doing fine. He was the musical director on one of the ships, and she was a social host on that same ship. And he was the band leader, and now he is the musical leader and band director at a high school in near Baltimore. And I'm not sure what Barbara's doing now, but I mean, I still hear from them from time to time. So it was quite an experience. The comedian got to marry somebody. So that was the very much exception. I want to go to the rule where most of the time an ordained pastor marries a couple. And the first thing that I would want to ask you is that I know that in like the Catholic Church, that when a couple wants to get married, is it called pre-Canaan?
Mhm.
Okay, there's a, I mean, I had a Catholic friend who got married, and they had a series of classes they had to go through, and
Yep.
all kinds of things like that.
Cana.
Pre-Canaan, I'm sorry.
Oh no, that was just acknowledging the wedding of Cana.
Okay.
But yeah, oh yeah, they have a lot more restrictions as to how weddings are done, when weddings are done, who does the weddings. Yeah, they're in, and also going through those classes, absolutely. But one of the bigger differences between Catholics, Lutherans, and Catholics and Anglicans, and I believe in Orthodox people, is marriage is considered a sacrament. For Lutherans, it's not. Marriage is sacred, but it's not a sacrament. So when it's a sacrament, they take it a little bit more serious. You can't take away a sacrament. That's why you have the whole thing of annulment versus divorce too. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to take the sacrament away from you. I have to go through a whole lot of other steps. That's a whole other issue.
Wow.
But we don't even have to go there, but because we got our work cut out for us just with weddings, because weddings are a lot of work, and some pastors enjoy them and some pastors don't. It all depends on how you approach it. I think, the big joke we have in the biz is when the couple comes to premarital counseling, they want to talk about the wedding, and you want to talk about the institution of marriage. And you want to talk about how do you communicate, and they want to talk about what color blends in with their bridesmaids' dresses and things of that nature. And so when we're on the same page, we're good. So I say, we're going to just go on the same page right now. We're going to talk about how do you resolve conflict? How do you communicate? How do you approach conflict in your life? Or, how do you settle things? How do you communicate? All of those kind of things. That's where my focus is. And last and most definitely least, does the bridesmaid's dress match the pyramids?
I understand. Okay. Well, I guess my question to you, starting in that process, is in the Lutheran Church, people, I mean, anybody can come to you. I mean, they even within the Lutheran Church, they do not have to be members of the church.
Yeah, and every congregation does it differently. We would actually charge people if they weren't members to come and have a wedding done at our church, and it's not a big. We don't make millions of dollars in it. In fact, I haven't even had a taker yet since I've been here. But if we do, we certainly can do weddings for people who aren't Lutheran even. And I've done that. I've done church weddings for non-Lutherans in a Lutheran church. Not a lot. A lot of times I find myself in the beach, sometimes next to a person's pool.
That's what I was going to ask you about. So when we say this, you're basically someone calls. How does that work? Someone calls you, says, "I want to get married. Would you marry us?" And what then do you say to them?
Usually, the first call I get for a destination wedding comes from the person who's connected with the caterer. It's a wedding coordinator. And a wedding coordinator will, for instance, usually be connected to a particular place. Like in the city of Sarasota, there might be a coordinator who's connected to Katazan, which is the John Ringling House, or to the Crosley Plantation or Philippi Creek. Those kind of destinations. They'll say, "Are you willing to do a wedding?" Because people, they still want to have a religious ceremony. They just don't necessarily want to have it in a church. And so when they do approach me, I get a couple and they tell me how they want their wedding to go. I make it very clear. I said, "I'm not a judge. I'm a pastor. God is going to come up in the service. I'm going to mention the role God plays in your life. If you have a problem with it, you might want to look for someone else." Nobody ever has a problem with that.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, so just along those lines, let me ask you in this way, whether it's a wedding coordinator or somebody's mother or their uncle or the people themselves, they call you up and they say, "Pastor Jeff, we would love you. We would really like you to marry us." And what do you say to them as far as what is your prerequisites that they would have to then do in order to have that marriage done?
Well, I do want them to sit down and meet with me a couple of times at least. And sometimes they'll say, "Let's just go to Starbucks," or "Let's just, or come to my office." It's not a formal thing. I want to get kind of a feel for what's going on in their life and why they want to get married. And let me be very clear. I can kind of joke about, colors and things like that. Most of the time when couples do come in my office, they are serious about talking about communication. They don't see this as a nuisance. We talk about how your personalities are how are they similar? How does that work to your advantage? How are they different? How does that work to your advantage? How does that work to your disadvantage? Those kind of things. How did God bring you in here? What role does God play? How's God going to sustain your? They're cool with those conversations. They really are. And so I've done lots of weddings in the church, but almost as many, perhaps more, outside of the church. But in every single case, they've been religious in nature.
Okay, well, and in saying that, I guess there's a couple of questions that come to mind immediately for me, and that's, number one is I would assume there would be maybe not red flags, but some areas of concern. So let's just say a middle-aged couple comes to you and they both are on marriage number 4 or something like that. Would that not be a part of your kind of feeling out process and going, I guess what I'm saying is, have you ever come to a fork in the road with a marriage that you've just said, "Look, you all can get married, whatever you want to do, but I don't feel good about this," and I'm
Fortunately, no.
okay.
Fortunately, has it happened to other people? Oh yeah. One thing I will say is, if I were to come to a place like that and I was going to say I just can't do it, then just go down the street and find someone else who can. So you could look at this as an opportunity of saying, this will probably be the only contact this couple will have with the clergy for a while. I use this as a golden opportunity to talk about what a richer or poorer, sickness and health, death do us part looks like. Rejecting people on sight, just say, leave, they're going to get married somewhere. If they wind up in Las Vegas, they wind up in Las Vegas.
Right. No, I understand.
I'd rather give them a religious wedding in a church by a pastor, or even not in a church by a pastor, than just to, lose the opportunity and send them to Vegas.
I understand, but I guess my question is, when you have these kind of counseling sessions with folks, is there time in there? Have you had an experience where you've heard answers that concern you, and you've made reference to that before a wedding has happened? I mean, that just
Oh yeah. Again, fortunately, no, that hasn't really happened. I do remember at least one time where a couple came to me and said, "We love each other so much we don't even argue. We don't even argue anymore. We don't argue. We've never had an argument." And I actually said to him, "Well, that's kind of bad." I said, "My homework to you between the next time I see you is you go home and have a good old argument, even if it's something dumb like where do you squeeze the toothpaste or something like that." I would say I think it's good for you to be able to, because you're gonna have an argument. Let's not kid ourselves. I'd rather you come with that experience than not. And there are good ways to argue. There are bad ways to argue. There are ways you can sit down and we can talk about that. How do you resolve your conflicts? That's very important now, because most marriages don't break up for lack of love. Most marriages break up for lack of communication.
right.
And so those kind of things are very important. And there are ways you can be very constructive when you're communicating. It's not very constructive when objects start flying around the room.
Right. Oh,
That's not very constructive.
Well, I guess my point being is that, whether they're members of our church, Lutheran or non-Lutheran, whatever they are, they want to get married at the zoo or the beach or in a church. You're saying part of your duties as a pastor is to at least express those.
Sure. Those reservations,
Yeah.
if they come up, and yeah, you're absolutely right. You really should be, and I've been fortunate enough, and honestly, probably haven't done as many weddings as some of my colleagues have, but I have done quite a few destination weddings because I am in Florida. We're in Florida, and a lot of people like to come here and get married. It's really hard with 2-3 hour sessions to really find all of the things that might give you pause. Sometimes they might be more obvious than others, but generally speaking, it's been pretty good.
So, okay. So before we get into the service proper, not to want to get into anybody's business or violate anybody's privacy or anything like that, but I have to ask the question: have you gone through this pre-counseling time and a date is set and everything, and suddenly a week before the wedding, you get a phone call and they go, "We're not doing this"?
Hasn't happened to me personally. Not within a week's notice. I know there are people who have canceled their weddings usually months ahead of time, but not within weeks. But no, I haven't. Done that. Set your time. And, it takes months to plan a wedding, and so if they cancel within a short period of time, that inconveniences a whole lot of people. I'm fortunate. Has it happened to colleagues of mine? Oh yeah, absolutely. It's probably happened even more than once. I have had an occasion, where a former girlfriend threatened to show up.
Really?
And so the ushers served as bouncers.
Okay.
But that was, you know, they were very. That's probably the closest thing to a funny story I've got.
And as an entertainer, I've been on the beginning side of that, where many times, especially working on cruise ships, a person approaches us and wants to do the big "Will you marry me?" question in front of a show as a surprise, or something like that. And on all my years of experience, and our producer Brian, who's in the travel business, may or may not appreciate this. It's all the times that they've wanted to do it maybe before the comedy show started, or one of the variety shows, or sometimes it happens on our Welcome Aboard show, so that they get engaged as the ship leaves during the time. And there's only been one time that I have been a witness to that. It was the big reveal, and she said no in front of 1,500 people on a cruise ship, of which they were going to be together for the next 7 days.
Wonderful next 7 days, I bet that was.
Yeah, well, it was awkward for everybody, but he made this big deal about it, and got our cruise director to agree to call him up for one of the activities during our Welcome Aboard show, and then they were gonna brought her up and had the ring and got on one knee and did the whole thing, and she covered her face like she was going to, of course, was just shocked and surprised and say yes, and she said no and ran off backstage into the crew area, and security had to go get her and everything like that. So that is
a lot more fun than well, that kind of activity I haven't really seen. I have dealt with, we can go back and joke. I every once in a while you'll have a bride who's a little bit picky, and a mother-in-law who's even more picky. Every once in a while you'll come across a case where my mom really didn't want me to release these doves, but I'm going to release doves, and that didn't go so well.
Okay, so let's move into that, because that's exactly where I wanted to go next. So getting out of it and getting into the actual, as a Lutheran minister, when I got married in the Lutheran church, believe it or not, I got married by 3 pastors.
Wow.
Yeah, so that means that marriage better last, and that's number one. But number two is, the only thing, we had the old Lutheran book of worship, the green book that I see right over behind you, and they basically split the service up and followed it. So we just had that service in a church, and et cetera, et cetera. My question to you is, it sounds like you do weddings, lots of weddings outside of churches, that, like you call them, destination weddings. Is there a format of which you follow? And then following up on that question, let you answer both at the same time. What are the elements, the essential element that you have to do in every wedding service that seals the deal, so to speak?
Oh yeah. Well, I love the fact that Massachusetts called you an officiant, and the state of Florida, I'm a justice of the peace. And
so was Andy Griffith.
Sure, right. He did weddings too.
Right.
The exchanging of the vows, is obviously where you make your statement of intention. That's a legal thing. I know on occasions I'll say to a couple, I say, just call me Joe. And I said, well, I happen to know your real name is Leslie. And what's the name on your driver's license? Well, it's Leslie. I said, Leslie, dude, I got to call you by Leslie, because this is a legal opportunity. I can't just say, I'm going to call you Butch. or whatever name you
So
prefer.
so it's not. Yeah, you have to be.
So there, so
formal.
it is. Yeah, in that sense, that formality isn't just because it's the right thing to do, but formality because it's the name you're baptized by. You know, nobody's baptized Butch or Buck or Chip or Spud. You know,
right? No,
so I always say
Well,
we're going to go by that, and I said I have to do that for legal reasons, not just because your mom never called you Spud. You know,
Right.
so
well, I would enjoy you.
that's pretty much it, really.
But I mean, you have to say, you know, because one thing I do remember is that we were able to write our own vows.
Yep.
And then, but every wedding I've ever been to, I can always remember, at least for me, and I haven't been to many weddings, but it seems like no matter what kind of service you had, the ending was always by the power invested in me by the state of wherever. I mean, that was when I got the guidelines for being an officiant in Massachusetts. It said that at the end of their ceremony, I had to say, by the power vested in me by the state of Massachusetts, I now pronounce you man and wife.
Yeah, I don't have to say that.
You don't.
Nope. What I do say is, by their statement of intention, have declared themselves as husband and wife. Those who God has joined together, let no one put asunder. And then when after they everything's done, I say it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you this day.
Right.
And you may kiss the bride. And they're really everybody. One time I forgot to say kiss the bride, and I upset a whole lot of people.
Wow.
Yeah. I'll never make that mistake again.
Oh.
I'll never forget that again. But that's not in there.
All right. So you don't have to, but then I know I had to sign a certificate and it had to be notarized and all that other kind of stuff.
For a civil wedding, I'm sure that's exactly right.
Yeah. So okay. So we've gotten through that phase of it. So then couple of quick things as we wrap up. We live in a retirement state. Can you reveal what you think? What is the oldest couple you think you've ever married?
Honestly, boring as it may be, I don't think I've never done a wedding for a couple under the age of 80. Usually about 75, maybe.
Okay.
I've only done a couple of weddings for older people. Yeah, that's a good question now. Yeah, sometimes people can't get married well up into their 90s.
Well, no, I understand. Sure. I just wondered.
I haven't had the privilege. I'm sure that would have been an adorable thing.
Right, but I mean, still, in their 70s, probably is relatively old too, and I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of stories behind that brings them together.
Just so I don't get every person in their 70s angry at me, I meant that's as old as that's the oldest wedding I've done.
Okay,
they're still youngsters.
Right. So then my other question is legal age of consent in the state of Florida is 16. So have you ever had like two teenager types ever approach you saying we're in love and our parents are against this and we really want to get married and
No.
you're not? I mean, you always
thank the good Lord no. Thank the good Lord no. I've never had that horror situation.
Right.
And if I had a parishioner who had a daughter and another parishioner who had a son, and they came and said, we're going to do this behind my parents' back, there's no way on earth I would say yes to that.
Okay.
Absolutely not. That just is a recipe for disaster.
Oh, I understand. I guess
but I haven't had strangers do that either.
Okay. I mean, folks have different family situations and everything. I know a lot of folks that
probably the youngest person I've done is 19.
Okay.
Yeah, I've got a few people in their late teens, in early 20s, but not really now. I've done a wedding for a person who couldn't drink champagne at her wedding because she wasn't of age.
Wow. Okay. Well,
but they all, at least she could vote. So that's the only thing I can think of.
Okay. Yeah. Well, no, these are all curious questions I think a lot of people would wonder about. So,
oh yeah.
So you've had that, and I'm sure you've had several marriages where you're bringing instant Brady Bunch kind of families together. That
lots of marriage. That absolutely.
Children.
Absolutely, I've had a lot of marriages where there's a split family among the bride. Dad is with another wife, mom is with another wife. And I'll tell you what, Al, when you love your kids, you put all that stuff aside. I've never had any issues. People were perfectly civil with each other. I know people would think, oh boy, that must have been a real contentious affair, having 4 couples show up, 2 of whom used to be married to each other. No, it never has been. In fact, it goes pretty well because you love your kid. The love for your kid takes precedence over all of that stuff, right. And that has been my case 100%. Right. Fortunately.
Okay, so then,
fortunately.
So as we wrap this up, this is one of the other things that a pastor does. When we always think of the pastor we see on Sunday in the robe doing the service, but your extra duty. So
most of the time I have to deal with groomsmen.
Really?
Yes. Yeah. That's the work part of my wedding is I remember one case really quickly. I mean, it's fun to talk about this. It's where a guy walked into the church with a case of beer and says, "Hey, where can I put this beer?" And I said, "Right back in your truck where you found it." That is the case, and it's funny,
right?
But that's pretty much it. And I say to people every once in a while at a wedding rehearsal, I'll say, "Okay, guys, this isn't your day. This is your friend's day. Take it down a notch." That has happened to me, absolutely.
Right. Well, so I think your ideal situation would be 1 or 2 counseling sessions, and then I assume the rehearsal and possibly the rehearsal dinner, and then the ceremony itself, and then I assume you have to stay. They always do pictures. You probably have to do some kind of pictures, and then whether or not you stay for the after
the reception.
The reception is kind of your choice at that point. But very, very interesting stuff. So how many years have you been a pastor?
I'm going to be 29 years in September.
All right. And how many, just in a guesstimate, how many weddings do you think you have performed?
Well, about 40, 50.
So,
maybe a little bit. Yeah, about 50.
Okay. So somewhere, so about 2 weddings a year.
Yeah, and then there'll be a stretch where I'll go a year without doing a wedding, but yeah, about 2 or 3 weddings a year.
Okay.
So it's probably a lot more than, it's probably about 50 sounds about right.
So, and as we conclude this, we say, because we know that you just had one marriage ceremony where you do not marry your
My son sure did.
And within the next 6 months, you have another wedding ceremony.
This time I get to wear a tuxedo because my friend is going to do the officiating and I can be a dad. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Really? So you're not performing that wedding?
One of the things my buddies that I grew up with, that I went to college with, I've officiated a lot of their weddings, and I've never had the chance. And they're like, "Oh, this is great. Now we don't have the awkward who's going to be the best man. We'll just make Jeff the pastor." And so I said, "Finally, I get to rent a tux."
Wow. Okay. Well, because that was going to be my next question, that if you were going to officiate the wedding, then who was going to walk the bride down the aisle? But that's that point is moot at this point.
The most humorous thing I heard is that a pastor walked his daughter down the aisle, ran into the sacristy, changed real quick, and it came out.
Wow. Okay.
Just like Superman.
Well, at least so this one you get to just hear your wife and your daughter boss you around, and because we all know that the actual wedding has nothing to do with the male species. We just kind of follow what we're told to do at that point.
Yeah, and I just like I tell Drew, my soon-to-be son-in-law, just nod your head a lot. That's the most important thing.
That is. Well, we have covered weddings, which has kind of been fun and interesting and also pretty enlightening to me. And next week, we're going to go to the opposite end, and we're going to go to funerals.
Right.
We'll go, so maybe we'll by the end of this series, at the end of the summer, maybe we'll have a working movie title out of this, of all the different
4 weddings and a funeral.
Or in Florida, several funerals.
Sure.
There's probably less weddings and more funerals, but we will talk about that institution, because I have some real questions about funerals and what is done and how they are done. So if you're in the Sarasota area, you're always invited on Saturdays at 5 p.m. and on Sundays at 10 a.m. here at our church at 8010 Fruitville Road. Please come and be with us. We're formally informal, is what I like to say, is that we follow a traditional service, but yet we are very informal in the way that we greet. It's just a very easygoing group. And if you cannot do that, we're hoping that I think our sound issues on our digital platform have been resolved. And now, as long as we can get our camera shots correct, every Sunday at 10 a.m., you can go to YouTube or Facebook Live and get our service as it's being broadcast. So I think plenty of opportunities there. So on behalf of PJG over here, I am AFE. We might as well go like we're all doing big time. And you are watching UL.